He left his pregnant wife for a mistress, but fate made him pay dearly. The twist is incredible. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more exciting stories like this one, and like the video to keep watching. The night was cold and silent. The wind was blowing outside, making the dry leaves dance across the damp asphalt. Inside the small apartment, Emily felt a different kind of pain, an anguish that suffocated her. Her hands trembled as she held her cell phone. Her eyes ran over those words, as if they could somehow change what was written on the screen. Message from James. "This isn't working anymore. I found someone who makes me happy. I'm leaving. Good luck with the baby." Her heart stopped for a second. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be real, not now, not at 8 months pregnant. "No," she whispered, feeling panic take over her body. Tears started rolling down her cheeks before her mind had even processed everything. James, the man she had built a life with, the father of her child, was leaving. Just like that, as if it was all just a contract that he could simply rescind. She leaned against the wall, trying to hold back the tears, but her body wouldn't listen. A sharp pain shot through her belly. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but her world was falling apart. Outside, James drove his sports car through the dark streets, his heart light, almost euphoric. Next to him, Lily smiled contentedly. "You made the right choice, love. You're finally free of that prison." James laughed, feeling a strange relief. Yes, he had made the right choice. Emily was sweet, but predictable. Lily, on the other hand, was electrifying, unpredictable. That's what he wanted, to live without ties, without obligations. But fate is unforgiving. Over the next few days, Emily tried to put the pieces of her life back together. She cried silently at night, holding her belly, feeling her son move as if he knew something was wrong. But she didn't have time to fall apart. She had to be strong. One night, as she was trying to get out of bed, a sharp pain hit her. She screamed, clutching her stomach. No, it was too early. The baby couldn't be born now, but her body had other plans. She ran to the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed. "Hello?" Sarah's voice, her best friend, sounded on the other end. "I need help. The baby is coming." Sarah arrived within minutes, helping Emily into the car. The hospital was only a few blocks away, but every second seemed like an eternity. The pain was unbearable. The fear was even greater. When they arrived at the hospital, Emily was rushed into the delivery room. The doctor exchanged worried glances with the nurse. The baby was coming early. There could be complications. Hours later, a fragile cry filled the room. Emily cried along, holding little Noah in her arms. He was so small, so delicate, but he was there, alive, struggling, just like her. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, James was living his new life. Expensive dinners, trips, laughs with Lily. He no longer thought about Emily. For him, that chapter was closed. But life has a cruel way of reminding us of what we leave behind, and James would soon discover that some choices have consequences, consequences he could never foresee. Emily watched little Noah sleep in the transparent hospital crib. His little eyes moved softly under his eyelids, as if he were dreaming of a better world. He was so small, so fragile, but his rhythmic breathing proved that he was a warrior. Emily wanted to be strong for him, but her heart was in pieces. The man she loved had abandoned her at the most crucial moment in her life. The memories were still vivid in her mind. James holding her belly at the first ultrasound, promising that they would be a happy family, the sparkle in their eyes when they found out they were having a boy. All those promises now seemed empty, as if they had never existed. The reality was that he had left without looking back. Sarah entered the room carrying a tray of hot soup and a look of concern. "You need to eat. You can't weaken yourself." Emily forced a smile, but the food tasted like nothing. I don't understand. How can someone do that? Just erase an entire life and move on as if nothing had happened. Sarah sighed, sitting down next to her. People like James only see what they want to see. At the moment, he thinks he's made the best choice. But Emily, one day, life takes its toll. It always does. Emily looked at Noah, stroking his tiny fingers. "I just want to be enough for him." "And you will be," Sarah assured her. "But you need to take care of yourself too." Emily knew Sarah was right. But how could she start again when everything she knew had fallen apart? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, James was enjoying his new life with Lily. The luxurious restaurant they were dining in was the kind of place he could never take Emily. She had always been simple, too homely. Lily, on the other hand, knew how to live life extravagantly. She exuded confidence, made him feel powerful, invincible. "You're so quiet, darling," Lily commented, crossing her legs and playing with her wine glass. "Thinking about something?" James forced a smile. "Just tired. Work, you know." "Well, I hope it's not that old story weighing on your mind. You've made the best decision. Now you can finally live without that prison. That's how Lily saw Emily, as if the woman who had been by his side for so many years was just a burden. James tried to push away any remnants of guilt. He was a free man now. But freedom would soon begin to take its toll. That night, while Lily slept next to him, James picked up his cell phone to check the notifications. There was an unexpected email from the lawyer at his old company. His stomach churned as he read the first few lines. The merger he had been waiting months for had been cancelled. Without this agreement, his position in the company was unstable. What was worse? The email mentioned that one of the key investors had withdrawn his support after finding out about his dubious personal reputation. James felt a lump in his throat. Dubious reputation? It was then that he realized his sudden abandonment of Emily, a pregnant woman, was circulating in some influential circles. People were commenting, some disapproved, and in the business world, image was everything. But he couldn't imagine how deep this could go. While James tried to control the damage, Emily faced her own challenges. Noah had to stay in the neonatal ICU because of his premature birth. The doctors assured her that he was fighting, but Emily had never felt so powerless. Every beep from the machines was a reminder of how fragile her son still was. She spent her nights sitting by the incubator, holding his little hand, singing softly to him. "You'll be all right, my love. Mommy's here." Even though she was exhausted, she refused to leave. She had to be strong, even though she felt destroyed inside. On the third night, as Emily tried to doze off in her hospital chair, she heard nurses whispering in the corridor. "Did you hear about him? The baby's father?" "Yes. They say he left his pregnant wife for another woman." "What kind of man does that?" "The kind who one day learns that life turns around." Emily closed her eyes, trying to ignore the words, but they hit her like sharp blades. Her name was on people's lips. Her pain was public, but if James thought the story would end there, he was wrong, because fate hadn't finished with him yet. A few days later, James received an unexpected call from an old friend. "Dude, what did you do?" James frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Your ex's story. She went viral. An abandoned pregnant woman raising a child on her own while the father runs off with someone else. The press is on fire. People are trashing you online." James felt his blood run cold. He opened social media, and his name was everywhere. Feminist profiles were condemning his actions. Businessmen said they would never do business with someone so irresponsible. Comments came from all sides. "Coward. Anyone who abandons a pregnant woman deserves to lose everything. This guy will pay." James tried to take a deep breath, but the feeling of suffocation was real. The phone rang again. This time it was his boss. "James, we need to talk, now." Noah was still fighting for his life in hospital. Emily was still learning to be a mother on her own. But James was about to understand that a few choices can destroy everything a man has built, and that was only the first consequence. James felt his hands sweat as he entered his boss's office. The company's always impeccable atmosphere now seemed stifling. He knew that this meeting wasn't going to be just any conversation. The gaze of Richard, his superior, was hard and cold. The tension in the air was palpable. "Sit down, James." He obeyed, trying to remain calm. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" James took a deep breath, preparing a convincing answer, but Richard held up his hand, interrupting him. "Your personal life shouldn't be the company's problem, but when your image affects our business, it becomes our problem. Our investors are worried. Your attitude has tarnished our reputation. Do you know what that means?" James's heart raced. Richard, I can sort this out. I didn't think my personal life would have this kind of repercussions. The boss stared at him for a long moment before letting out a frustrated sigh. That's the problem, James. You didn't think. And now it's too late. You're out. Those words were like a punch in the gut. James opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. Out? He had dedicated years to that company. He was one of the best. How could they just discard him? Richard, give me a chance. I can reverse this. The decision has already been made. Get your things and leave. James felt the world crumble around him. He left the office in silence, but as soon as he got into his car, he punched the steering wheel in anger. Everything was falling apart. His job, his image, his reputation. He needed a solution. Quickly. When he arrived at the apartment he shared with Lily, he found her on the sofa, fiddling with her cell phone. As soon as he entered, she looked at him with disinterest. Have you seen this? We're on all the gossip sites. James took off his jacket, trying to contain his irritation. Yes, I saw it. Lily rolled her eyes. It's ruining my image too. I'm an influencer, James. I can't afford to be associated with this kind of scandal. He frowned. That kind of scandal? The story of the poor abandoned pregnant woman and the cruel man who ran off with her lover. You know how the internet works. Now people see me as the villain. It's hurting me. James ran his hands over his face, exhausted. I've lost my job, Lily. I need to sort this out. She crossed her arms. Maybe it's best to get away for a while. He laughed in disbelief. You're breaking up with me. Lily shrugged. I don't want to be dragged down with you. James felt his stomach turn. You convinced me to drop everything. You told me it was the best choice. And it was. For me. But now it doesn't suit me anymore. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Lily, who seemed so passionate and determined to live this adventure with him, was getting rid of him, as if he were disposable. You're just like everyone else, he muttered. She laughed. Welcome to the real world, James. He left the apartment without looking back. His head was throbbing. His life was in pieces. No job, no money, no place to stay. And what was worse? For the first time, he missed Emily. Emily, who had always been there for him. Emily, who would have held his hand in difficult times. Emily, who was now alone looking after their son, Noah. The thought of the baby made something turn inside him. For so long, he had ignored the existence of the son he had abandoned. But now, with no one, nothing, he felt an emptiness that was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Emily was facing her own challenges. Noah had finally left the ICU, but still required constant care. Emily spent her nights awake, cradling him in her arms, singing to him, promising that everything would be all right. But the truth was that nothing was fine. The bills were piling up. The money was running out. Even with Sarah's support, she knew she had to find a job. But who would hire a solo mother with a newborn baby? That morning, while feeding Noah, she received an unexpected call. Mrs. Miller, this is Elizabeth Carter from the Heart and Hope Foundation. Emily knew the organization. They helped single mothers and families in difficulty. We heard about your story. Some people were moved and wanted to help. We'd be interested in talking to you. Emily blinked in surprise. Talk about what? About an opportunity. James, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the weight of his own decisions. After being rejected at several job interviews, he realized that his name had been burned. He was no longer a respected executive. Now, he was the man who abandoned his pregnant wife. And it was only after yet another rejection that he realized how serious the situation was. He needed to start again. And for the first time since he left, he knew exactly where he needed to go. When Emily opened the door that night, his heart almost stopped. James was standing there with a look on his face that she hadn't seen for a long time. What are you doing here? He took a deep breath. I need to talk to you. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She should send him away. But part of her needed to hear what he had to say. And deep down she knew that this conversation would change everything. Emily felt a weight on her chest as she stared at James in the doorway. He looked different, thinner, more haggard. But that didn't erase what he had done. Nothing could. Noah wriggled in her arms, letting out a soft sound, and it was at that moment that Emily noticed James's gaze. He wasn't just there for her. For the first time, he seemed to really see the son he had abandoned. "What do you want, James?" Her voice was cold, firm, but inside her emotions were at war. He had been the love of her life, the man she had dreamed of growing old with. But now he was just a stranger. James swallowed. Can I come in?" Emily hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to send him away, but a bitter curiosity made her open the door a little wider. James walked in slowly, as if he didn't know where he was going. The small apartment was organized, but he could see the signs of tiredness everywhere. Piles of diapers, baby bottles in the sink, a simple crib in the corner of the room. Emily was doing everything herself. He looked at Noah again and something tightened inside him. He had never really thought about his son, what it meant to be a father. But now seeing him there, so small, so vulnerable, he felt a weight he had never felt before. Is he all right?" Emily laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Now you want to know? After months of not even asking?" James closed his eyes for a moment. "I know I made a mistake, Emily." "Did you?" Her voice rose. "You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed me. You left me alone at the worst moment of my life." He lowered his head, without reply. "Why are you here, James? What do you really want?" He took a deep breath before facing her. "I've lost everything, my job, my reputation. Lily left me. I have nothing left." Emily crossed her arms. "So you've only come back because you have nowhere else to go?" "No." He took a desperate step forward. "I came back because I finally realized what I'd done. I was an idiot. I thought I was freeing myself, but in reality, I was destroying everything that mattered." Emily felt her eyes sting, but she blinked quickly. She wasn't going to cry, not in front of him. "I don't know what you expect from me. Forgiveness? A second chance?" James looked at Noah again. "I just want to meet my son." The words hit her like a blow. For months she had prepared herself never to hear it from him. She never imagined that James would one day want to be part of Noah's life. It's not that simple. You can't just come and go as you please. "I know that. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to think that he really had changed. But could she trust someone who left her at the most difficult moment? Before she could answer, a faint cry filled the apartment. Noah began to stir, restless, and Emily automatically cradled him in her arms, trying to calm him down. That's when James took a hesitant step forward. Can I hold him?" Emily froze. The thought of James touching Noah scared her. He didn't deserve that. But at the same time, a part of her wanted to see what would happen. Reluctantly, she moved closer, and with trembling hands, handed Noah to him. James held his son for the first time. And in that instant, something inside him changed forever. Noah was so small. His little body barely weighed in his arms. His eyes, so innocent, tried to open, but he was too sleepy. James felt a lump in his throat. How could he abandon her? How could he turn his back on his own son? Emily watched everything in silence, trying to decipher every expression on James's face. And then something unexpected happened. A tear ran down his cheek. James, the man who had always prided himself on his coolness, was crying. Emily looked away. She didn't want to feel anything for him. But seeing that scene made something inside her break. James looked at her, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve anything, but I want to be a father to him." Emily wanted to believe that. She wanted to think that maybe he could change, but was it possible? Before she could answer, a loud knock on the door interrupted them. Emily frowned. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door, and her blood ran cold. In front of her stood Lily, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 men in suits stared at Emily. "We need to talk," Lily said with a cold smile. Emily felt her body stiffen as she faced Lily standing in front of her door. The woman's smile was cold, calculating, but what really frightened her were the 2 men in suits standing next to her. They didn't look like simple escorts. Something was wrong, and Emily felt a shiver run up her spine. James, on the other hand, looked tense. His face lost all color when he saw Lily standing there, as if he were facing a ghost he hoped never to meet again. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice harsh but full of nervousness. Lily crossed her arms, her eyes shining with a cruel satisfaction. "Did you really think you could just disappear and everything would be fine?" "Oh, James, you're so naive." Emily looked from one to the other, trying to understand what was going on, but it was when Lily stepped forward and held out a brown envelope to James that everything became even stranger. "You have until the end of the week to sort this out. Otherwise, Lily paused briefly and looked at Noah in Emily's arms. "Well, I guess you don't want to involve anyone else in this mess, do you?" Emily's heart raced. "What does this mean?" James took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it and quickly flipped through the papers inside. His face turned even paler. He held his breath, clenching his teeth tightly. "You're kidding me, Lily." She laughed, smoothing her hair with an air of satisfaction. "I never play with money, darling." Emily couldn't contain her anxiety any longer. "Can someone explain to me what's going on?" James wiped his hand across his face, visibly upset. "These are documents from a contract I never signed." Lily tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, but you did, love, with your fingerprint and everything." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "Have you been involved in something illegal, James?" He looked up at her, and for the first time Emily saw real desperation there. I don't know. But if these documents are real, I'm up to my neck in it." Lily laughed again. "You've always been absent-minded. You've always trusted the wrong people, including me." The air became heavy. Emily felt her fingers instinctively squeeze Noah against her chest. "I want you out of my house. Now." Lily sighed, rolling her eyes. "Of course, darling. But don't worry, I'm sure James will sort everything out soon. After all, he has a lot to lose." She took one more look at Noah before leaving, followed by the two men in suits. As soon as the door closed, Emily turned to James, furious. "What have you done?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I don't know, Emily. I was blind. I thought Lily was everything I wanted, that I was living the perfect life. But now it's all falling apart." Emily felt a bitter taste in her mouth. "You've ruined your life, and now what do you want? For me to sort it out for you?" James shook his head, his eyes shining with anguish. "I don't want to get you involved. I wanted to put things right. I wanted to at least try to be a father to Noah." Emily felt her heart squeeze when she heard that. She wanted to believe, but James had made so many wrong choices that trusting him seemed impossible. "You can't just show up and expect me to forget everything. If you want to be a father, prove it, but I'm not going to put my son at risk for you." James nodded slowly. "I understand." Emily didn't know if she believed it. The next few days were tense. Emily struggled to maintain her routine, look after Noah and ignore the weight of Lily's visit. But deep down she knew it wasn't over. James was different. She could tell. He tried. He called every day to ask about Noah. He showed up with groceries, diapers, clothes for the baby. He didn't ask for anything in return, he just did. But was that enough? Meanwhile, something began to change for Emily. After her story went viral, she received an invitation for a TV interview, an opportunity to tell her side of the story, inspire other single mothers and perhaps get a better job. The night before the interview, she looked at Noah sleeping and wondered if she was doing the right thing. But then she remembered everything she'd been through. The abandonment, the sleepless nights, the fear of not being able to give her son a future. She would no longer be the woman left behind. The next day, she sat down in front of the cameras, took a deep breath and began to speak. The audience was thunderous. People connected with her story. Companies began to seek her out, offering opportunities. She finally felt that her life was taking a turn, but the peace didn't last long. That night, as she was putting Noah to bed, the phone rang. She answered it without thinking. "Emily?" The voice on the other end was weak, almost unrecognizable. "James." "James? What happened?" There was a short silence before he answered, and what he said made the ground disappear from under his feet. "I need help." And then the line went dead. Emily felt her heart race as she heard James's voice so faintly on the phone. The call dropped, and a knot formed in her throat. Her first instinct was to ignore him. After everything he'd done, after the abandonment, the lies, the consequences she was still carrying on her shoulders, why should she care? But something inside her wouldn't allow her to stand still. There was something in his voice, a real desperation, a fragility she had never noticed before. She picked up the phone and tried to call him back. Voicemail. One more time. Nothing. She looked at Noah, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the chaos that life seemed to insist on throwing at them. Grabbing her car key, she called Sarah. "I need a favor." Sarah arrived quickly, worried by the urgent tone in her friend's voice. Emily explained everything in a few words and asked her to stay with Noah for a few hours. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, hesitantly. Emily wasn't sure about anything, but she needed to find out. "I just need to see if he's okay. Then I'll figure out what to do." The night was cold as Emily drove through the city's dimly lit streets. Her heart was pounding, as if anticipating that something would change that night. After a few unsuccessful attempts to find James, an instinct led her to the small ramshackle hotel near the center. Something in her told her that was where he would be. The receptionist looked at her suspiciously when she asked for James's name. "Room 207, he finally said, after seeing the concern on her face. Emily ran up the stairs. When she reached the door, she knocked firmly. No answer. She tried again, her chest tight. "James!" Silence. His heart hammered against his chest. A fear crept into his mind. What if something had happened? She turned the handle. The door was unlocked. With a tightness in her throat, she pushed slowly and entered. The scene before her made her hold her breath. James was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, his eyes lost, his hands holding his head. Crumpled papers littered the carpet, the dim light illuminating his face, which looked haggard in a way Emily had never seen before. He looked up when he saw her. "You've come." His voice was almost a whisper. Emily closed the door behind her, trying to keep her heart steady. "What's going on, James?" He let out a heavy sigh and ran his hands over his face. "I've lost everything, Emily. Not just the job, the money. I lost who I was. And now I don't know who I am anymore." There was a long silence between them. Emily took a deep breath. "You called me because you needed help. So tell me, what do you want?" James laughed softly, without humor. "I wanted to go back in time, to do everything differently." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. For months, she had dreamed of hearing this from him, but now that she was hearing it, she didn't know if it still mattered. "Time doesn't go back, James. You left me. You left me when I needed you most." He closed his eyes, as if those words were a physical blow. "I know that. Then why am I here?" James looked up, and Emily saw something she had never seen before: vulnerability. "Because, despite everything, you're still the only person in the world who would care." Emily looked away. She didn't want to feel sorry for him. "And what are you going to do now?" James was silent for a moment before answering. "I don't know," Emily sighed, crossing her arms. "I know what you're not going to do. You're not going to give up." James looked at her in surprise. "What?" She took a step forward, her voice firm. "You may have made horrible choices, James, but running away from what you've done won't fix anything. You say you've lost everything, but you still have a chance to be someone better." James laughed again, but this time there was something different, a glimmer of hope mixed with weariness. "Do you still believe that?" Emily took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I think you can try to prove me wrong." There was a silence full of meaning between them. James held that look for a long time, as if he was trying to find some strength within himself that he thought he had already lost. Then he did something Emily hadn't expected. He stood up, that was all. But in that gesture there was something different. "I want to see Noah." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "You have to earn it." James's eyes were filled with determination. "Then let me try." Emily didn't know if she believed him, but for the first time, she saw a different man in his eyes than the one who had abandoned her. And maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet. Emily watched James standing there in front of her, with that expression that mixed desperation and determination. For months she had imagined herself meeting him again, and in all her scenarios he was repentant, begging for a second chance. But now that he was really there, asking for the opportunity to see Noah, something inside her hesitated. She didn't know if it was fair to allow him back into their lives after everything, but she also didn't know if it was fair to deny Noah the chance to meet his father, if James had really changed. James's eyes were fixed on her, waiting for an answer. But Emily didn't have an answer to give. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside her. "Do you want to try?" "Then try it." James nodded slowly. "How?" Emily crossed her arms. "I don't know yet, but I do know that I can't just let you into my son's life without guarantees." James ran a hand through his hair in frustration, but agreed. "I understand." Emily wasn't sure he really understood, but at least he seemed willing to try. She picked up her bag and walked towards the door. "Let's go." James followed her hesitantly. "Where to?" Emily looked at him seriously. "You said you wanted to change. Let's see if you're willing to make a real start." The walk back to the apartment was silent. James seemed lost in his own thoughts, and Emily didn't want to break the silence. When they arrived, Sarah was waiting for them in the living room with Noah on her lap. As soon as she saw James, her expression tightened. "What's he doing here?" Emily looked at Sarah with a look that asked for patience. "He wants to try to be a father." Sarah arched an eyebrow. "And you believe that?" Emily sighed. "I don't know, but I want to see how far he'll go." James remained silent, respecting the conversation. Then his gaze fell on Noah, his son. It was strange to think about it, strange to realize that this little human being was part of him, that he carried his blood. Noah waved his little arms in the air, having no idea of the complexity of the situation. Emily looked at James. "You can hold him." James hesitated for a second before moving closer. Sarah, still suspicious, took Noah into her arms. He seemed so small, so light, but at the same time holding him felt like an enormous weight on her shoulders. James looked at Emily, as if asking permission to continue. She just watched. Then something happened. Noah opened his eyes, those big, curious eyes, and fixed them on James's face. For a brief moment there was a silent connection between father and son. James felt his chest tighten. Does he recognize me?" Emily shook her head. Babies that age don't recognize faces yet, but something inside her told her that somehow Noah knew. James held Noah's little hand and felt something break inside him. "I'm sorry, Noah." It was a whisper, but Emily heard it. And at that moment something changed. Maybe, just maybe, James really was willing to try, but life doesn't give second chances that easily. Over the next few days, James tried to adjust. He showed up to help, brought groceries, spent time with Noah. But Emily still had barriers. She couldn't just forget what had happened. And then a new twist happened. That afternoon, Emily was in the kitchen making tea when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Mrs. Emily Carter." "Yes, it's me. This is Mr. Robert Hamilton's assistant. He's one of the biggest businessmen in the state, and he saw your interview on television. He'd like to arrange a meeting with you." Emily frowned. "A meeting? About what?" The voice on the other end sounded calm and professional. "He wants to offer you an opportunity, a job to be exact. He thinks your story can inspire many people, and he'd like to talk to you in person." Emily felt her heart race. This was it. The chance to finally get back on her feet. She made the appointment for the next day. When she hung up the phone, she felt a mixture of happiness and fear. James entered the kitchen at that moment. "Is everything all right?" She took a deep breath before telling him about the offer. He smiled, genuinely happy for her. "This is incredible, Emily. You deserve it." Emily nodded. "I know you do." For the first time, she felt like she really believed it, but the story wasn't ready to end yet. The next day, Emily dressed carefully and went to Robert Hamilton's office. It was a luxurious building, very different from anywhere she had ever been. When she entered the businessman's office, she found an elegant man with an intelligent gaze. He smiled and invited her to sit down. Emily, I've followed your story and have been impressed by your strength. I'd like to offer you a position in my foundation. She widened her eyes. Foundation? Robert nodded. Heart and Hope, which helps single mothers and families in difficulty. I think your experience could be valuable to other women going through what you've been through. Emily felt a lump in her throat. It was the perfect job. I'd love to. Robert smiled. That's great, but there's something I need to tell you before we close the deal. Emily frowned. What is it? Robert became serious. Lily came to see me yesterday. Emily's heart stopped for a second. What? She wanted to tarnish your image. She said you're not who you seem to be. Emily felt her stomach turn. And you believed her? Robert smiled sideways. Of course I didn't. I know people like Lily. But it made me realize that you still have enemies out there. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to contain her frustration. What do I do now? Robert leaned forward. You prove that you're bigger than them. Emily took a deep breath. She wasn't going to back down. As she left the office, her phone vibrated. It was a message from James. We need to talk, now. Emily felt a shiver run through her body. She had just taken a giant step towards her future, but something inside her told her that the past wasn't yet ready to let her move on. Emily felt her heart race as she read James's message. Something in those words seemed more urgent than usual. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to decide if she really wanted to know what he had to say. After everything, he was still part of a past that she was struggling to leave behind. But at the same time, something inside her made her hesitate. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the simple fact that, like it or not, James was still Noah's father. Taking a deep breath, she typed a quick reply. Where are you? The answer came within seconds. I need to meet you in person, it's serious. Emily hesitated, but ended up sending the location of the cafe where she used to go with Sarah. If James had something really important to say, then he should go to her. She wasn't going to chase after him again. When he arrived at the cafe, he found James already sitting at a table, staring into nothingness, as if he was deep in thought. As soon as he saw her, he stood up quickly. Thank you for coming. Emily crossed her arms, keeping her guard up. Be direct, James. What's going on? He ran his hands through his hair, visibly nervous. It's about Lily. Emily felt her body stiffen. What about her? James took a deep breath before dropping the bombshell. She wants to destroy you. The silence between them was piercing. Emily blinked a few times, trying to process. What do you mean? James picked up his cell phone and slid his finger across the screen, showing a series of screenshots of messages and emails. She's trying to spread rumors about you. She says she's going to spread false information to discredit you, claiming that you're using Noah to gain fame, that you lied about what happened between us. Emily felt her blood run cold. This is ridiculous. No one will believe her. James pressed his lips together, clearly uncomfortable. Do you really think so? She has contacts, Emily, influential people, and she has a history of manipulating things in her favor. Emily clenched her fists. What does she want? James hesitated before answering. Money. Power. She doesn't just want to hurt you. She wants something in return to leave you alone. Emily let out a bitter laugh. That's blackmail. Exactly. She took a deep breath, feeling a crushing weight on her shoulders. As much as she wanted to believe that she was strong enough to ignore Lily, she knew that if the woman started spreading lies, it could damage her new job opportunity, her credibility, and even her future with Noah. Why are you telling me this? Emily asked, narrowing her eyes. James held her gaze. Because I'm not going to let it happen. Emily blinked, surprised. And how do you intend to stop it? James swallowed. I have a plan, but I need your help. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. James. He leaned forward, his voice lower and more intense. Trust me. Emily laughed sarcastically. After everything, do you really expect me to trust you? James sighed, defeated. I know I don't deserve it, but this time I'm trying to do the right thing. Emily studied his face for a long moment. He looked different. He wasn't the arrogant man who had abandoned her, but she didn't know if that was enough. Before she could reply, her phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "If I were you, I'd think long and hard before continuing with this farce. People don't like liars, nor mothers who use their children to promote themselves. See you soon." The air became heavy. Emily looked at James, feeling her stomach turn. Was that Lily? James took the cell phone from her hand and read the message. His face closed up. Yes. Emily felt a wave of anger rise up inside her. It's over. I'm not going to stand by any longer while she tries to destroy my life. James nodded. Then let's end it together. Emily never thought she would say that one day, but for the first time, she and James were on the same side. And Lily had no idea what was coming. Emily could feel the blood pulsing in her ears as she stared at the message on her phone. It was as if all the struggles she had faced so far had culminated in that moment. Lily had crossed a line that she couldn't ignore. James looked as tense as she did, his eyes fixed on the screen, his hands clenched on the coffee table. The silence between them was dense, full of unspoken meanings. "This has to stop," Emily finally said, her voice low but firm. James looked up at her. "I know that. And I know how to do it." She crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "Lily only has power over you because she has influence and contacts. But what if we take that away from her?" Emily arched an eyebrow. "How?" James slid his cell phone across the table to her. On the screen there was an email. "This is proof that Lily forged contracts and used my name in transactions that I never authorized. The problem is that if I go to the police alone, they might not believe me. I need someone to validate this information." Emily frowned. "And why would I do that?" James held her gaze. "Because if Lily falls, she won't be able to threaten you anymore." Emily was silent for a moment. There was a weight to it. It would be a risk, but perhaps it was the only way to get rid of Lily once and for all. She picked up the phone and typed quickly. "What are you doing?" James asked. "Calling Robert Hamilton. If there's anyone who can help expose Lily publicly, it's him." James looked surprised but didn't question it. He just watched as Emily arranged a meeting with the businessman for that very afternoon. Hours later, Emily and James were sitting in Robert's imposing office. The man was watching them carefully, his fingers crossed on the dark wooden desk. "Are you telling me that Lily not only wants to destroy Emily's reputation, but has also committed financial crimes?" James nodded. "Yes, and here's the proof." He handed over the documents and emails he had gathered. Robert looked at everything in silence. "This is very serious. If this is true, Lily could face criminal charges." Emily held her breath. "Can you help us?" Robert smiled slightly. "I didn't get where I am by ignoring injustices. Let's do this the right way." The next morning, the story about Lily began to circulate in the newspapers. The exposure was overwhelming. Not only were her financial crimes revealed, but also her history of manipulation and lies. Companies with which she worked began to cut ties. Her public image plummeted. And then came the final blow. James formally denounced her. The police launched an investigation, and in a matter of days, Lily became the center of a scandal. Emily felt a weight come off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe. But what would happen now? James had proved that he was willing to change. But was that enough? That night, he showed up at her apartment. "Can I come in?" Emily hesitated, but eventually nodded. James looked at Noah, who was sleeping in his crib. "He's growing up so fast." Emily smiled slightly. "Yes, he is." James took a deep breath before speaking. "I know I did everything wrong, Emily, but I've never been as honest as I am now. I want to be in my son's life. I want to be someone better. And I want you back." Emily's heart raced. She had spent so long protecting herself, rebuilding her life without him. But deep down, part of her still wanted to believe. "James," he held her hand carefully, "I don't expect you to forgive me now. But let me prove that I can be the man you and Noah deserve." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Let's see how far you get." The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it seemed that a new beginning was possible. If you liked this heartwarming story, Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think James deserves a second chance? Now click on the next video and keep following more stories full of emotion and overcoming.